What's up, everybody? AyyScare here, back with what I'm going to call my season one wrap up. And what this episode is really for is to just kind of do a once over as to how the 20 seasons or 20 episodes went and do a little bit of a deep dive. So, over the past week, I've been messing around with a couple of different spreadsheets, but certain things I didn't like. I got way too into doing random stats that didn't matter. So what I ended up coming up with for this episode was I want to dive a little bit more into our team history, how we did overall, and then I have a spreadsheet going over all of our drafts. I gave us grades on everything, and then we're going to talk about the top 10 draft picks we had through this series. So, to start out here, we're going to hop in and look at how we did in our team history tab here. So, I went ahead and skipped to the next season so that our most recent season is in here. And as a reminder here, our first episode was in season 2069. So, coming into that season, our very first episode, we went 3-13. And I'm going to kind of lump a lot of this together here. The first 5 seasons, so up until 2074, we were really struggling, or I guess 2073, we were really struggling finding a decent starting quarterback. In my opinion, that was definitely the biggest hurdle that we had those first couple of seasons. Those first couple of seasons, we actually had a very solid defense, but we just had an offense that could not get off the ground, basically. So after episode 5, we did a big trade deal in order to trade up to number 1 in the draft. And I believe it was episode 6, at least according to this, it should be. Let's just make sure. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, so it should have been episode 6. We made a huge trade deal, and we got first overall pick, where we picked Harry McGee. And we're going to talk about this a little bit more in the draft overview. But Harry McGee was a starting quarterback for us for 7 seasons. And he was really a mixed bag. I mean, we got him and we were a middle road team. It's not like, we brought him in because we went 1-15 the season before. Season before him, we actually finished 7-9, and we were basically 100% held up by our defense. So he was coming into a decent situation, and he just did okay his first 3 seasons, and then it was just a downhill road for him. And I'm not going to blame that completely on him. Obviously, we could have done better in drafts. We could have done better in free agency, things like that. But when you spend a crap ton on a player that you're hoping is going to step in and really take your team to the next level, it comes with a lot of trade-offs. After we ran with him, he had a horrible season where here he went 2-14. And at that point, we had first overall pick. So we ended up getting Alex Baxter, who was our quarterback throughout the rest of the series. And Alex Baxter came in, had 2 kind of rough seasons to start things off. Then he made playoffs 5 years straight. And then our final episode was a down year. We missed playoffs. But for a quarterback, 8 seasons, you make playoffs 5 out of 8. That is pretty darn good. And outside of the quarterback situation, our top runner was always all over the place. You can see here, it changed almost every single year. Alejandro Forbes was definitely our most reliable asset in terms of running back. But if you look here, throughout our series, we only had 2 seasons where a player ran for over 1,000 yards. So our running game was rough. Most years it was just bad. A couple of years, it was definitely like a three-headed backfield. So in those cases, you don't expect 1,000 yards from somebody. But it was definitely a rough passing game throughout this entire thing. Wide receiver was not too much better. Again, we had a ton of players that were top receiver who, like if you look at some of these years, we had top receivers that didn't even get 800 yards. And, you can have a good team without that, but it's hard. Um, Towards the end of this series, I think that we finally got to a point where we had a very valid offensive scheme. We had Alex Baxter, we had Alejandro Forbes, we had Jamal Lindsay at wide receiver, and this right here, this 11-5 season, was definitely the peak of our offensive production. So I feel like if we had run this series another 5 seasons, I think that we would have made playoffs probably at least 2 more times, if not 3 more times. And I do believe that maybe we wouldn't have won a Super Bowl, but I think that we were on the right path. As a reminder, in the final season, we did lose Jamal Lindsay. Alejandro Forbes was getting old, so we had to, come up with kind of replacements. But Alex Baxter, still very talented. I think he's only like 30. So he should still have another couple of years, definitely at the helm here, to take this team into the future. In terms of our defense, we didn't have many seasons where we got like a 100 plus tackler, but our defense throughout this series, they had 1 or 2 down years, but it was majority, I would basically say a top 10 defense for almost the entire series. So our defense was always there. Took a while for our offense to get there, but we did get there. And one thing that I do want to say is, I went into this series knowing Front Office Football 7, not knowing Front Office Football 8. There were definitely some differences. Talking through every decision you make, it also makes this game a very different experience, I guess is the word I'm looking for. When I played 600 hours of Front Office Football 7, it was always just me clicking through things, making decisions. Now that I'm actually trying to talk through all of my thoughts and why I'm choosing things and what's worth me saying, what isn't, it added a whole another level to all this. But let's look here at this win comparison. So in here, we can see how the different teams have done since the beginning of the simulation. So the simulation started in 2019. And when we took over, the final season was 2068 at that point. Here you can see we took over Jacksonville. And in the history of the league, they were drop bottom of the barrel. And by a long shot, Jacksonville and Denver, both of these teams were, missing out by at least 30 games or so from the next one. And then honestly, most of these other teams evened out over all these years. So it makes sense with the draft and market caps and all that. It makes sense for things to even out over time. If we look at kind of like the 20 years before we actually took over, which I guess would be here. Here you can see that there's a little bit more, Pittsburgh was absolutely killing it. Baltimore, Denver, Jacksonville down there at the bottom. And so going into this, it's pretty clear we had basically the worst team in the history of the league. Even though the past 20 years we weren't drop dead at the end, throughout all of this, Jacksonville never really got a foothold in the rankings. So let's now look at this. If we look at the years that we actually played, we did not make it into the top half here, but we're pretty darn close, especially since almost all of these teams are like within like 5 games of each other. So we definitely took Jacksonville from being laughingstock of the league to hey, this team is actually a potential threat. They can make playoff runs, things like that. If we look at just let's do the last 10 seasons we did together. Here, we started moving up that board even more. I mean, here, without counting it, it looks like we're somewhere around 12th. And if we look at even more recently, so let's just look at the final 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We'll look at that final 6 years. In the final 6 years, we were the 4th most dominant team. So we really did take this team from a point of non-contention and almost being like a laughingstock of the league to being a team that legitimately was making playoff runs. If we look at the graph here, which I pulled this up in our last episode together, you can see the team was averaging like maybe 6 wins throughout the first 50 years. And then here is where we took over. And you can see, I mean, especially if we take out the first 2 seasons we had together, where we were kind of in a full rebuild mode, these bars are ridiculous. I mean, we were averaging probably 9 wins a season throughout this. And that's taking into account the 2-win and 4-win season we had. So this was definitely the best that Jacksonville had ever seen their team in their history. So now I want to dive into the drafts. So obviously, the draft is always a big thing in the real NFL, and it's a big part of how you're going to successfully build your team in this game as well. So before I start showing the ugly charts that I made, I just want to preface this by the grades that you're going to see on these are 100% my own, with kind of my own 2 cents thrown into it. I don't know if the NFL has like a specific grading calculation that they use when they grade teams and picks, but the grades that you're going to see here are my own thoughts and how I feel it went. A means it was outstanding, B means it was good, C means average, D means below average, and F means we completely failed that year. So let's hop in. We're going to look at each one of our drafts, and then we're going to look at top 10s and things like that. So here we are. Let's just hop into a full screen mode here. All right. So this was our first year together, and I honestly believe that this was one of our better drafts. I gave us a B on this draft. Just to go through the different columns here, we have the round that the pick occurred in, the pick in that round, the position of the player name, how many games they played in the league, how many games they started in the league, how many times they ended as first team, or kind of like on the all-star team basically, how many times they ended second team, notes from when they were on our team, what happened after they left our team, and then the grade that I gave them as a player individually. And this is really interesting because during the filming and without doing play-by-play where you pick up on player names and stuff a lot more, doing this analysis really made me realize how absolutely terrible some of the picks were, that I kind of picked somebody and then completely forgot about them. So this is just interesting to me. So first year together, our first ever pick in the draft was a right tackle. He played for us for 3 seasons. The first 2 seasons, he didn't play. The 3rd season, he played poorly. And outside of that, he was benched, basically. After his rookie deal, he jumped to a number of different teams throughout different seasons, but he only played 1 full season after us. So he was injury-ridden and really was a poor pick at 12. So I gave him a D. And just so you know, in terms of my ranking, normally I'm only going to give an F if the player literally never made it off of practice squad, which happened more than I realized, which you'll see here in a little bit. One name that you'll probably recognize is Everett Parker. Everett Parker was our starting fullback. Now, even though here he only started 33 games, normally you don't have a fullback technically in your starting lineup. So he was our very stable, very decent fullback. He did make second team one time, and he retired with us after 9 seasons. In terms of if I think he was a good pick at 211, it might have been a little bit of a reach for sure, but I'm overall very happy with how he turned out. Just so you know, I'm not going to touch on every single player in these, but we will touch on some of the names that I think you guys will remember if you've watched the series. Gabriel Dotson, he was a second round running back that we got. He went for 3 consistent 500-yard seasons with us in his second and to fourth year. We dropped him after his rookie deal, and he never saw the field again. He actually was not picked up by another team, and he ended up retiring. So, he at least was a part-time starter for us, so I did leave him at a C. I think you could make an argument that he could be lower than that, especially as a second-round draft pick, but you never know. The 2 other players I want to talk about from this year, right here, Johnny McClay. Honestly, this was one of our best draft picks throughout this entire thing. He was a 5th rounder, 13th pick in the 5th round, inside linebacker. With us, he played with us all 11 years that he played in the league. He did end up on the second All-Star team one time, and he ended up finishing his career with the 5th most tackles in our team's history and 6th highest assists in our team's history. So, I would have been happy with this from a first-round draft pick, considering that this is how this guy ended his career as a 5th-round draft pick. I'm extremely excited about that. I think that he was, without a doubt, one of the best value picks we got throughout this entire series. And then we have to mention the player that I think a lot of people might have thought I was an idiot for picking. We drafted that kicker in the 7th round. He was 7'11" there. He played with us for 16 seasons as our only and starting kicker. He finished on the first team twice, second team once. He finished with the most field goals in Jacksonville history, most points scored, and then he finished 3rd in the history of the league in terms of number of field goals, and 5th in the league in terms of points scored, 5th in points scored. So those 2 really were kind of cornerstones for our team for a while throughout this series, and especially considering where we got them in rounds 5 and 7, those were complete steals in my opinion, and definitely brought the ranking of this draft class up. And when you see some of our other years, you'll probably understand why I gave this team a B in terms of their grade. Second year together was not a pretty draft. So we got one really good pick this draft, and that was Watanabe. And we got him at 115. He was our starting tight end for 12 seasons or 12 episodes. He ended up finishing 4th in Jacksonville receptions, 5th in receiving yards, 3rd in receiving touchdowns, 10th in lines from scrimmage. In all 12 of his seasons, he never had a season below 350 receiving yards, which I just want to note here, if that was a wide receiver stat, it would be a little bit concerning. But as a tight end, that is incredible. And in over half of his seasons, he actually went for 600 or more yards. So he was an absolute killer. He never actually made it to the Pro Bowl, which was interesting. But in my opinion, that's just an interesting stat that I wanted to throw on here. I'm not putting too much weight on that. In my opinion, he was a great pick at 115, and I feel like he really worked out. Outside of that, it was a crapshoot, absolute crapshoot. Our second round 1 pick here, defensive end, he played 0 games as a starter for us. He never did anything really when he did play. We dropped him after 3 seasons. He went to get a few sacks for 2 other teams before falling out of the leagues 4 years later. This was an absolute disaster of a pick. And then the only other pick really worth mentioning here was our third pick here, another defensive end. He actually did start 2 seasons for us. Then seasons 3 through 5, he kept getting injured, so we dropped him after that season. He ended up going to Houston and being a starter there for a number of years. And he actually was a full-time starter when they won their Super Bowl. So even though he did not pan out for us in any way, he was still a very decent player. So I did give him a C. If we were rating him on our team alone, he's probably a D. But overall, he actually did have a decent career. Outside of that, you'll see here, all of our other picks were absolutely atrocious. Our 5th through 7th rounders never made it off of a practice squad. So, this year, rated it as a D. Definitely not a great year. 3rd season together. Here we had a number of decent picks and then a number of terrible picks. So, in terms of good picks, our first round, 8th overall, we went cornerback here in Oscar Stevens. He did start for us for 4 years as our cornerback, but we dropped him after the 4th season. He went to play for 3 other teams, but he only played as a starter, or at least a full-time starter, 1 additional season. So, for an 8th overall pick, he's a little bit disappointing, but he was at least a decent player overall. At round 1, pick 24, we went defensive end in Darian Parrish. And this is a name that you might not recognize too much because I never focused on him too much. But he actually has 4th most sacks in Jacksonville history, 3rd most hurries, 4th most blocked passes. And that was only with being with us 9 years. He played for us for 10 years, but he only started 9 of those years. After the 10th season, we dropped him. He ended up going and playing with Carolina for 2 seasons, and he won a Super Bowl there as a starter. So overall, absolutely great pick, and he did get an A rating from me. If we keep going down here, we got a lot of Fs here, a lot of players that didn't do much of anything. Down here, though, we did get another tight end here. He played 2 seasons for us, didn't do much. He went and played for 4 other teams through 4 seasons. Overall, a very disappointing player, but I did mark him as a C just because I feel like for a late 3rd rounder, he at least was able to go and play in over 100 games, starting 18 games. So not great, but way better than basically everybody else on this year's draft. So really, if Darian Parrish was not here, this draft might have ended up in F territory. But Darian Parrish really did he ended up being one of the best players that we drafted. So ended up giving this draft a C. 4th year together. You'll probably recognize the first player on the list and nobody else. In 1st round, 12th pick, we went cornerback and Nicholas Patino. He ended up playing for us for 10 straight seasons as our starter. He actually didn't start with us 1 season. I forget now if that was an injury or if he didn't play his rookie year or what. But he played 10 seasons for us as a starter. Overall, did very well. He ended up being 6th in passes defended for Jacksonville. He got 19 career interceptions, 608 career tackles, finished on the 2nd team once, and we dropped him after 11 seasons. He went and played 1 final season split between 2 teams, but never really played all that much. Outside of him, and honestly, even though I'm giving him an A, for somebody that started for you for 10 seasons, at a cornerback position like that and you used a 12th overall pick on him, uh, I was hoping for higher numbers from him. I'll just leave it at that. I don't think he played poorly. I think that he was definitely an above average player. I'm not sad that I picked him there, but I would have wished for higher numbers. Outside of that, this year was an absolute crapshoot. Nothing of really nothing worth mentioning here. Um, so, and to be fair here, based on everything else I did, this guy actually probably is a C. So let's just talk about him real quick. Round 4, pick 15, we went wide receiver Perry Schultz, who played 4 years with us, only 1 year as a starter. In the 1 year he started, he went for 533 receiving yards and 4 receiving touchdowns. After the 4 years with us, he went and played with 4 other teams across 5 years, but never had a season better than this. So for a 4th round pick, I would say that that's at least average or at least decent, but definitely not a standout player. Still definitely giving this year a D overall. 5th year together. 5th year together, we had a couple of interesting picks. So our 1st round pick, 22nd overall, was in left tackle Dwight Turney. And this guy played with us for 8 seasons. He was starting for 6 of those seasons, or at least started the majority of the 16 games in those seasons. After the 8 years with us, we dropped him and he played 1 additional year for New Jersey. Overall, he never, broke into like a top 10 for us. He never made Pro Bowl. But, when you have somebody that's able to start for you for 6 years at a position like left tackle, that's definitely a good player to have. So I ended up giving him a B. 2nd round, 21 pick, outside linebacker in Heath Bailey. This guy was mainly like a part-time starter for us. We dropped him after 6 seasons. He went and played 2 additional years in the league, but only saw the field in 1 game. So overall, not a great player, but overall, if you're splitting starts for 5 seasons, I'm at least giving you an average. If we keep going down here, Christopher Burgess, he was a 5th round pick for us. He played backup corner for us. Now, as a reminder, he was behind Nicholas Patino and Oscar Stevens. So it kind of makes sense that he was a backup. For money reasons, we dropped him after 1 season. He actually went and became a starter for 3 seasons on other teams. So in terms of how he played for us, probably a D. But in terms of his overall career, I'm giving him a C. And then in the 7th round here, we did get a punter. This punter played as our punter for 4 seasons, including 1 year as the best punter in the league. However, we dropped him after 4 seasons because he was asking for too much, and then he never played again, which I thought was very interesting. It seems like, especially if you have a guy that finished as the top punter in the league 1 year, at least another team would be willing to pay him something. So I didn't look into it too much. I don't know if he ended up getting injured or maybe he had some kind of injury. Maybe it's just that he wasn't willing to play for what a team was willing to pay him. I'm not exactly sure, but when you get somebody and they end up being the best punter in the league for a year, 7th rounder, I'm giving him a B. Overall this year, I gave us a C. 6th year together. Only pick worth mentioning this entire thing. You can read all the other ones. Harry McGee. Now, Harry McGee was our starter for 7 seasons, and we made 2 playoff runs. In those years together, he did win Offensive Rookie of the Year his first year. He finished 3rd in our quarterback ratings, 5th in pass completions, 5th in passing yards. And overall, I was actually very happy with Harry McGee. The issue with it, if I had gotten him at 1-1 and that was it, I would have been very happy. Truth be told, we gave away 3 first-round picks and 2 second-round picks for this guy. And based on what we gave up for him, he was not worth what we paid for him. That being said, even after he was on our team, we dropped him after 7 seasons. He went to Detroit, and he's actually still playing when we finished this series. He's played there for 8 seasons now as their starting quarterback. They've made 4 playoff appearances, but have never won a Super Bowl. And he's still starting his way with Detroit as of leaving out this series. So for a 1-1 pick, I think he was a little bit of a disappointment. But in terms of, I've seen way worse picks at 1-1 than that. So I did give him an A. I think an argument could be made that he's lower than that, but you're going to be hard to find somebody that put up these numbers of starts, the numbers that he was putting up at quarterback, things like that. So I gave him an A. The only other player that I'll mention here is Bryce Croft. He was our 7th round pick. He did play for us for 2 seasons. In his rookie year, he went for over 600 rushing yards with a 4.57 average. We dropped him after 2 seasons. He went to be basically a part-time starter in Minnesota for 6 seasons. So I did give him a B. What are we at now? This is our 7th year together. F, I don't even want to talk about this. So first and foremost, we didn't even have a 1st or 2nd round pick because of the trade for Harry McGee. So we didn't even have a 1st or 2nd round pick. 3rd round pick was a piece of trash. The only player in here that might be worth mentioning is the tight end, but even him, he did next to nothing. F. 8th season together. Once again, we did not have a 1st round pick this year because of the Harry McGee trade. We did have 2 2nd round picks though, and we used those to get 2 guards. The first guy, Brant Fenderson, he did not pan out at all for us. Freddie Norton, though, he actually was a starting guard for us for 7 seasons. Ended up on our top 10 list for key run block opportunities and pancake blocks. He also finished on the 1st team and 2nd team once each. And he actually retired with us after 9 seasons. So Freddie Norton was a good pick for us at 2 for 24. We also got this center in the 3rd round, Aiden Chandler. He actually ended up being a first team center 2 times. He was our starter for 5 seasons. We dropped him after that for money purposes. I believe it was money purposes at least. And he went to play for Tampa Bay, where he's been there 8 seasons now, and he's actually still playing. So he, even though he was probably like a B rating for us, he ended up as an A in terms of his career. Nobody else here worth mentioning, so let's keep it moving. What are we at now? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9th season together. Now, here we actually did get a number of players I want to talk about. Sean Cowart. Now, this guy was a 1st round pick for us. He was a part-time starter with us for 12 years, and he's actually still with our team now. His numbers are not crazy, but you have to remember this guy has basically been starting part-time because we have another defensive end who we're going to see, I think, next draft, who basically has split their entire careers together. And since we normally run a nose tackle instead of 4 defensive front, we are only normally playing one of them a down. But overall, I'm still very happy with him, and I think that he really did pan out for us, so I gave him an A. Here we have Miles Webb, who was one of our safety picks. He played with us for 4 seasons, but only 1 season as a starter. Because of that, we dropped him after the 4th season, and he went to play for California for 6 seasons, 4 seasons there as a starter. No really noteworthy notes in terms of his performance, but I think that still deserves a B. Now, Casey Burnett, this is a name that you'll probably recognize from our series together. He was our backup quarterback for 7 seasons. And after the 7th season, he went off of our team and he went to actually be the full-time starter for Cleveland for 5 seasons. He's actually still their starting quarterback, actually. They never made playoffs with him, at least so far. But for a quarterback that went in the 3rd round, I think this is actually a very interesting line for him. So I gave him a B. The only other player that I'm going to mention here, 4th round, 26th overall, a wide receiver, Dylan Fields. He never really did much for us. After us, he went and played for 2 other teams across 3 seasons. His best season ever was with Cleveland, with 412 receiving yards. So really not anybody of mention, but he was at least an average pick for us. This year gave us a C. We're then on our 9th? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Oh, this is our 10th year together. 10th year together. This was one of the best drafts we ever had, so we're going to kind of talk through it here. First round 14th pick, left tackle Tevin Lang. This guy ended up playing for us for 9 years. He was a starter for 7 of those seasons. After he was on our team, he went and played 2 one-year deals for 2 other teams, and he's actually still looking to get a contract the year after our season. So he got an A from me. Never made a crazy top block run opportunities, anything like that for us, but he was at least a solid starter. Jonathan George, he played 4 years for us, 2 as a starter. In his 3rd year in the league, he went for 64 tackles, 8.5 sacks, 1 interception. After us, he went to be a part-time starter with 4 other teams over 7 seasons, and he's still active as well. So, he's still, I don't know if he's looking for a contract or if he's on a multi-year contract right now, but he's still in the league. We then had our 3rd round draft pick here in Archie Blanchard. And this is the guy that ended up splitting starts with Sean Cowart. This guy was with us all 10 seasons of his career, finished 8th in Jacksonville Hurries, and retired with us after 10 seasons. So for a 3rd round pick, given that an A. Will Powell, right defensive end here. He played 8 seasons for us, went for 117 tackles, 26 sacks, 58 hurries. So for a part-time starter for us, that's a decent stat line. After the 8 seasons, he went and played 1 decent year in Miami before retiring. Everybody else going down this list here basically ended up becoming backups in the league, but that basically marks them as C's for me. If you're like a 5th round draft pick and you basically are just a long-term backup, that's basically a C rating as far as I'm concerned. But between these different players here, especially here at the top, and considering we didn't get any D or Fs as far as I'm concerned, I gave us an A here. In my opinion, this was one of our better drafts. 11th year together. We spent $119 on running back Howie Pontbrand. And this dude was an absolute piece of crap for us. He was a backup for us for 2 seasons, and we used a 1st round pick on him. After that, we dropped him. He ended up going to Carolina, where in the next 2 years, he put up back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons. After that, I just had, I think that's supposed to say 2. So I think that he played 2 more seasons after that and then retired. So if this was in terms of our team, this dude gets an F. But he ended up going and playing actually very well for Carolina. So I'll give him a C. We then had Caden Woodson, who played as center starter for us for 8 seasons. And he's actually still active on our team when we ended the series. So that was a very good pick for us there in the 2nd round. We then had a outside linebacker pick here. And with this one, he played for us as a starter for 2 years, but on our team 4. His second year in the league, he went for 71 tackles and 4.5 sacks. After us, he went and played for a couple of other teams, and for that, I gave him a B. Let's just see here. These two guys aren't really worth talking about. Here we did get an F rating on this guy. 5th round pick, never made it off practice squad, never what you want to see. So this year I gave us a C. I would consider this kind of an average draft. Next year together. This was a interesting draft, and I think you'll mainly recognize 2 of the names. So round 1, pick 11, running back Alejandro Forbes. This guy ended up being a great running back for us for many years. He was never a killer running back. He only, I think, finished 1 year with over 1,000 rushing yards. But he was at least there, dependable. You can see here in the 7th season, he went for 1,065 rushing yards, 642 receiving yards, and 9 total touchdowns. So that is a great stat line in terms of that season. He also finished 3rd overall in Jacksonville's history when it comes to rushing yards, 3rd in rushing touchdowns, 5th in all-purpose yards. Since we dropped him after his 8th season, he went and played 1 year across 3 different teams. So basically he became a backup for 3 different teams in a single season. And he's still looking for a contract for the upcoming year. He finished 1st overall 1 year. That's going to be that year that I have listed there. And 2nd 1 year. So overall, once again, in terms of, do I feel like 11th overall might have been a little high for this guy? Yes, but it's a complete crapshoot. So overall, I'm still very happy with this pick. The other name that you may recognize here is 2nd rounder here, Dylan Barlow. Dylan Barlow was on our team for 6 episodes. He really never did anything. You can see here his best year ever was his 4th year. He went for 357 yards, 1 touchdown. After that, he went and played for Washington and didn't do much of anything either. So he got a D. Definitely was a disappointment. Outside of that, nobody really worth mentioning on this draft. But basically, because of Alejandro Forbes, I gave this year a C. Next year together. This was, once again, one of our best drafts, so we do have to talk about a number of these. First and foremost, 1st overall pick. This was the year that we dropped Harry McGee and decided to roll with Alex Baxter, who ended up being the quarterback that has seen us through the rest of the series. So far, through 8 seasons, he's 1st in Jacksonville history in terms of completion percentage, 3rd in passing completions, 1st in yards per pass attempt, 1st in yards per carry, and 10th in rushing yards. So not only is this guy a very reliable passer, he's also a very reliable running quarterback. So I always like that dual threat, and he seems to really hone in on it. The one downside to this that I do mention here, this is an ongoing player. However, in our 8 seasons with him, he went on IR 3 times right before we entered playoffs. So that is definitely of concern. He cannot keep going on IR like that. But it is what it is. He still gets an A. He's killing it for us. And unlike Harry McGee, we didn't have to trade crap ton for this pick. We actually got this pick because of how poorly Harry McGee did. So he was definitely worth what we used this pick on. We also had another 1st round pick this year in Alfredo Beckett, who was an outside linebacker. This guy played for us for 8 seasons. He's actually still playing for us. His best year ever was his 6th year. He's at 82 tackles, 5.5 sacks, 4 interceptions. And again, this is an ongoing player. He's currently ranked 9th all time on Jacksonville for sacks at 33. So once again, A rating from me. Another name you might recognize, Miles Giles. Here, second round, first pick. He's a defensive end. He played for us for 4 seasons. And in those 4 seasons, he was definitely a good player, but he was not outstanding. So after his 4th year, we did end up dropping him. He is actually still playing with Baltimore. And in the 4 seasons he's been with them, he's had very average stats to what we saw. So once again, not like a top 10 defensive end, but definitely starter worthy. We then have a right guard that we got here, Brent Burnett. He started for us for 5 years, was on our team 8 years, and he's actually still on our team. So I gave him a B as well. Let's see, we got another good defensive tackle here. He actually didn't do much for us, but he went and he's actually started for Anchorage for the past 6 seasons. So, he won a ring with them, but he's had very average numbers. But still, starting for another team, they won a ring, can't complain there. 5-1 here, we got George Henney. He started for us for 3 seasons. His 3rd season with us, he went for 101 tackles, 3 sacks, and an interception. Because of how much he was asking for, we actually dropped him after the 3rd season. He went to play for Cincinnati and Houston, and in his years with them, he's almost always finished as a top 10 middle linebacker, never as a top 5, but kind of near that top 10 range. And he's still active in the league. And then we also, this year, in the 6th round, picked up Zach Parker, who actually got onto the 2nd team 1 year as a fullback. He started as our fullback for 7 seasons, and he's now starting for Athens, I believe that is. Yeah, so this overall was a great year, especially since we didn't have to actually trade around too much for some of these picks. So this was potentially the best draft we ever had. Marked that there with an A. Next year together. This is the year that I followed one of the commenters' recommendations. I don't know if it was so much his recommendation, but he recommended I watched a video, and in that video they talked about the importance of getting a good wide receiver in this league, or in this game. So I used 3rd overall pick on Jamal Lindsay, and he was honestly a mixed bag. If you remember correctly, in his first 4 seasons, he did very little. We franchised him for the 5th year and the 6th year, because both years he went over 1,000 yards and did really well. But then he refused to sign with us. So he went and he's now playing for Pittsburgh. But in those 5 or 6 years with us, he did have a 1,200 yard year with 12 receiving touchdowns on that year. And even though he had the slow start, mainly only 2 noteworthy seasons, he has 5th overall receiving touchdowns for Jacksonville and 9th in receiving yards. So, I gave him a B, mainly because as a 3rd overall pick, I was really hoping for somebody that was going to come in and dominate, if not the rookie year, 2 years after that. This guy definitely had a slow start, and then the money situation with him was just a nightmare. So he was not a failed pick by any means, but I'm not willing to give him an A. We also then this year had tight end Leonard Stanton, who actually was our starter for 6 seasons, and he's actually still our starting tight end. He's never had an outstanding year, but he, in his 7th year, which was actually this past season, went for 784 receiving yards, 4 receiving touchdowns. So, very interesting player. Just because of those 2 picks, I gave this year a C. Next year, we used 17th overall on a cornerback here in Ethan Harding. He is still our starting corner to this day, so that was an overall great pick for us. Outside of that, this year was atrocious. Really nobody here worth talking about. everybody on this list basically is a clear D or F in my opinion. Oscar Yoni did end up being a part-time starter for us for 3 seasons, and after us never made another team. So again, not really too much worth mentioning here. One of our worst drafts, in my opinion, gave us a D. We got 5 more seasons, guys. All right. This year, we used our first round pick on wide receiver J.J. Morton. This guy has started at wide receiver since entering our team. His best season was his 3rd season with us. 961 yards, 1 receiving touchdown, and hasn't eclipsed those numbers since. So I marked him as a C. I think that he's an average to... Let me rephrase that. He's an above average wide receiver, but for a first round draft pick, I am a little bit disappointed in his numbers. So I'm marking him a C for now. One other thing to note, we're now in a position where a lot of these players are still going to be in the league, so their grade is a little bit harder to give, but we'll keep going here. Second rounder, we used it on a tackle. He started for us for 3 seasons, was on our team for 5, and he is still a starting tackle for us going into what would be our next season. And then the only other pick I really want to talk about here, Wendell Robinson. This guy was our backup for 5 seasons. He actually is still our backup. And in the couple of times that he's had to go in, which has mainly been for end of season games and playoffs because Alex Baxter keeps getting hurt, he's actually played extremely well. He only normally plays like 2 games a season or something, so it's hard to extrapolate the numbers really. But if how well he plays in 1 or 2 games a season went full season, he would actually be a better quarterback than Alex Baxter. But I don't think that's a fair assumption. As a backup, he's very good, so I marked him as a C, as an average pick here. Outside of that, really not worth mentioning anything here. You guys are more than welcome to read through it again if you want to. Next one. Here we did get 2 big picks. Tom Silvis is the tackle that we picked at 128. And he didn't play with us his rookie year, but since then, so for the past 3 seasons, he's been a starting left tackle for us. And he is the best rated player we ever drafted in this entire thing. He's currently rated at an 88 in his 5th season. So he's an ongoing project, already made second all team once. So I definitely gave this guy an A. The other A worth mentioning here was 3rd round pick Travis Lincoln. This guy has been our starting defensive end. And last episode, he went for 42 tackles and 10.5 sacks. So for a 3rd round pick, happy with that. I'm giving it an A. Outside of that, it was a real mixed bag and a lot of trash towards the end. So I gave this year a C. This year, we made a trade up to try to finally get a safety in Dalton Kaplan. And he was a disappointment because he did not make it off of our bench/practice squad in his rookie year. So that was definitely, a disappointment. That being said, in the 2 seasons he has actively played, he's actually done exceptionally well. This past season, which was his 2nd year really starting in the league, he went for 99 tackles, 2 interceptions, and an 82 pass defendant rate, which is extremely high. Normally high 70s I'm happy with. So considering this guy's low 80s, that's incredible. Now, it's really hard because, if we had 10 more years of this guy to see how he pans out, this would be a much easier thing to grade. If the 2 years that he's played are any indication, I'm marking this guy as an A. In the years I don't have listed here, he also went for 90 plus tackles. And, if we have this safety that's going for near 100 tackles for, even 5 or 6 seasons, that's going to be a great player. So marked him as an A. Nobody else this draft is worth of mention. So gave us a D here. Considering that he did have a good second and third season, that saved us from getting an F in this draft. 2 to go. This was a D. So first and foremost, first round, 22nd overall, we went with this guy named Chris Sullivan. He only saw the field sparingly, never started for us, or I guess he started 1 game for us. Absolutely terrible pick. Gave him an F. Now, granted, he is only probably like 23 or something right now in this game, so he has the ability to go and redeem himself, but if his first 2 seasons are anything to go by, he's an F. The 2 players that saved this from being an F overall. This guard here in Jalen Woodson, he's been our starting left guard now for 2 years, so gave that a B. And then down here, we also picked up inside linebacker BJ Buckley. He's been a part-time middle linebacker starter for us. Last season, he went for 58 tackles and 1.5 sacks. So considering we got this at 6th round, I'm happy with that pick, so I gave him a B. But again, everything else in here is basically trash right now, so D overall. And then we have to talk about last episode, which if you guys watched it, I made a bunch of trade downs. It was pretty disgusting and gave us an F here. Now, this is really hard to really tell anything about because all of these players are basically backups right now. Not a single person that we drafted in this draft ended up starting for us. Most of these guys are still on our team, but as backups. So gave basically everybody here a C, D. The one player that got an F never made it off our practice squad. Again, this is a very hard year to draft because it's possible that if we had simmed like another 5 years, 1 or 2 of these players would have actually been decent for us. But in terms of how they did after 1 year, this was easily one of the worst drafts we ever had. So mark that with an F. So that marks our drafts per year. So now let's look at the draft recap here. So between those years, here are some numbers that I just thought were interesting. And I guess I made this a little bit too big. Let me zoom out a little bit there. There we go. That basically fits. Move over just a little bit. Oh gosh. Okay. Good enough. All right. So, you know what I can do? Perfect. Okay. So in terms of the overall draft ratings, we had 2 that I marked as an A, 1 as a B, 10 as a C, 5 years as a D, and 2 years as an F. And I mean, this is, my fault. I made some very bad decisions in the draft. The draft is, to a certain extent, a blind pick. But I could have done a little bit better research, a little bit more diving into some of the other players, things like that. So in short, we had more bad drafts than good drafts. But what can you do? In terms of overall players, we had 22 players that I marked as an A rating, 18 as B, 30 as C, 34 as D, and 36 as F. And I know that some of you might think, wow, like that F is the highest number. That's really bad. But, a lot of players in the real world, especially, when you get out of like the first 3 rounds of the NFL draft, there are a ton of players that get picked and you never hear of them after the draft. So even though, yes, this is the highest number and it should be lower, this actually isn't that crazy in my opinion. So first round draft picks by position. So throughout the years together, we got 2 quarterbacks. That would be our Alex Baxter and Harry McGee. We got 2 running backs, 3 wide receivers, 1 tight end, 4 tackles, nothing else on the front line, And then our defense was 1 defensive end, 1 defensive tackle, no linebackers, 3 corners, and a safety. And looking at this, I'm actually, this wasn't something that I was like intentionally paying attention to when we were doing the series. So it's interesting to look back on it. My biggest takeaway from this is that we had a very strong defense going into this. And throughout the series, we got away with really good later draft picks on things like linebackers, and we pulled in a couple of key people from free agency. But it's interesting that of the 20 seasons, only 6 I used a first round draft pick on defense. I'm not going to say that I think that that's a problem, but moving forward, if I do another series on this game, it's something that I want to pay a little bit closer attention to. I am a huge fan of making sure that the offensive line is strong. That being said, I only used first round picks on tackles. And if I remember correctly, I think 3 out of 4 of them actually did well for us. But, maybe it would have been worth me, instead of going for the tackle, maybe it was like the 3rd or 4th best tackle on the board. Maybe I should have just grabbed the best guard. Maybe that would have done better for us. I'm really not sure, but it is interesting to just kind of see that stat line laid out there. In terms of our second round draft picks by position, I'm not going to go through each of these one by one because you guys can read it, but most interesting things for me to note here is I never once got an inside linebacker or a cornerback in the second round. So that means in the first 2 rounds, I only drafted 2 outside or inside linebackers throughout the entire series. Like I said, we got lucky with some late picks, but it does throw in that question like, hey, maybe if one year if I didn't draft a tackle and I went, top outside linebacker on the board, would that have significantly changed things for us? And these are things that we're never going to know the answer to, but it's interesting to theorize about it. And then in terms of all rounds combined, this is something that I did notice myself doing. I'm sorry. I have some weird fascination with tight ends. I drafted way too many tight ends in this series. If we look here, I drafted 13 of them compared to only 9 wide receivers. So this is definitely something that I need to work on. I need to stop getting baited into drafting crappy tight ends. Outside of that, though, we drafted a ton of quarterbacks, most of which ended up doing diddly squat. Very reminiscent of the real world, though. A ton of running backs that ended up just basically, being backups for a year or 2, not doing much. And then even though we drafted 12 safeties, really only one of them panned out to be anything. And that was right towards the end of our series. Also, the 1 punter and the 1 kicker we drafted, both in the 7th round, they were 2 of my A ratings. So, you got to be a little bit careful about that. But I just thought that was interesting that they both panned out for us. So now it's the capstone of the series, and we're going to talk about the top 10 draft picks that we had. Once again, this is me kind of picking and choosing. There's no real math that went into this or anything like that. So let's talk about it. So, believe it or not, I think that our best draft pick throughout this series was actually Darian Parrish, defensive end. Once again, he finished in the top 5 in multiple categories for the history of our team. He went on to start for Carolina and helped them get a ring. So, in my opinion, even though he wasn't a player that I probably said his name a lot throughout the series, when I started looking back on this, I really do think that he was probably the best draft pick we ever had. In my opinion, our second best was Watanabe. And I don't think we really need to talk about him again. We've already talked about all these stats. This is just copy and paste it from the other ones. But Watanabe definitely was a cornerstone to our team for a long time. And I couldn't be happier with how he turned out, basically. Third overall, I'm listing Alex Baxter. Now, he's an ongoing project for us, so it makes him a little bit harder to rate. But so far, he's done very well, and I'm overall very happy with him. Tom Silvis, once again, an ongoing project, so hard to rate. But as of right now, he's the top rated player we ever drafted. And at left tackle, we're hoping that Alex Baxter remains healthy with Tom Silvis on his front. Might be a disappointing for some of you, but I actually think that our fifth best overall pick was our kicker, and I'll tell you why. Right, first and foremost, he was a 7th round pick, so that instantly gives him a couple bonus points in my book. Right, like we didn't use a 1st round pick on a guy that played decently. This was a 7th round pick. Generally speaking, those 7th round players, if they even make your starting lineup, you're happy to a certain extent. This guy went on, best kicker in the league twice. He ended most field goals for us, most points scored for our team history. He finished 3rd field goals for the entire league, 5th in points scored for the entire league. He retired with us after 16 seasons. This guy was a crutch for us for 16 seasons. This would be like, in my opinion, drafting, Justin Tucker, right? He's just a player that may only be on the field for, 5-10% of the plays a game, but absolute cornerstone and a great player to have. So I was very happy with him as a draft pick. 5th was Johnny McClay. He was the 5th round inside linebacker that really did pan out for us. Ended with 5th most tackles in Jacksonville history, 6th most assists. And especially because he was a 5th round pick, I think that he's definitely worth having on this top 10 list. George Henry, even though he did not play all that well for us, he did have one good season for us. But after we lost him, he has remained a top 10 linebacker in the league. So even though he didn't pan out well for us, I do think that he was a great pick and a player that, potentially has the chance of getting into some record books if he remains healthy for another, 4 or 5 seasons. Harry McGee, I have listed as 8th overall best draft pick. Now, as I mentioned earlier, in terms of what was spent to get him, he was definitely a bit of a disappointment. But for a quarterback that has now been in the league 15 years, is that right? Yeah, he's been in the league 15 years now, basically a full-time starter throughout all of those years. He's still playing in the league right now. He's made 6 playoff appearances. So overall, disappointment for what we paid for him, but overall a good quarterback. Dalton Kaplan, again, this is a guy that I have to say I'm, wildly guessing where to rate this guy. Based on what I think his stats will end up like, I think it's fair to rate him somewhere in this top 10. That being said, we really only have 2 years to deal with him, which is why I have him down here right now. Again, if these numbers continue for another, let's say 5-6 seasons, he should easily end up in the top 5 list. But for right now, it's too hard to tell off of 2 years. And then 10th, I have Alejandro Forbes. Once again, he had an outstanding year for us, his 7th season. Overall, he's been a very, very good pick for us. But he's also had a number of seasons where he only went for, 600-700 rushing yards. And with an 11th overall pick, I'm going to say I'm a little bit disappointed. But overall, once again, I'm definitely happy that we had him on our team. He definitely made some great plays and helped our team make playoffs multiple times. So with that, once again there, we have Darian Parrish, considered our best overall draft pick in my opinion. Watanabe, Baxter, Silvis. Those are 4 names that if you've been following this series, you'll probably remember. You'll also probably remember McGee, Kaplan, and Forbes. The three here in the middle, definitely a little bit more under the radar in terms of their name mentions, but overall, great value picks that I think definitely deserve to be on this list. And with that, guys, that is going to wrap up my Front Office Football 8 series. Now, as a reminder, I love this game, so there is a good chance that you're going to see this game return to my channel. That being said, I am planning to take a little bit of time off from recording it, mainly to try to learn the game a little bit better. I would love to hear if you guys liked this wrap-up episode. I actually had a lot of fun putting these kind of charts together. So if it's something that you guys like, and I do end up running a second series on this game, I might end up doing kind of some different charts per season and, give us some, maybe some bar graphs or some line charts or things like that, just to make some of the numbers a little bit easier to look at. The game allows us to export, I believe they're CSV files or text files in some way. So we should be able to import that information and make some charts on it relatively easily. I haven't delved into that at all, but if it's something you guys would be interested in seeing in a future series, definitely let me know. Until then, I am planning a couple of other series on some other games that I've been having fun with. So if you're only here for my Front Office Football 8 series, you'll see some other games pop up. Hopefully I don't lose you guys because, like I said, I do plan to bring this game back to my channel at some point. But we'll see. Thank you guys for sticking around. I hope you guys found this interesting. And until I see you guys again, AyyScare out.